I came home excited to check my college fund, 4 years of birthday money, savings from summer jobs, and everything Mom left me, only to find it gone. All of it. That's when Dad finally admitted the truth. This is a story of betrayal, consequences, and making sure the person who took everything from me lost even more. Before we get into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. I still remember the exact moment my future vanished. It wasn't some slow realization, no gradual sense of dread creeping in. It was instant, like a door slamming shut in my face. That night, I got home late from my shift at Pete's Diner, smelling like grease and dish soap, my feet aching from running around taking orders. But I didn't care. Because earlier that day, I'd gotten the email, I'd been accepted to my dream college. Ohio State. Full tuition wasn't covered, but I had my savings. Or so I thought. I kicked off my shoes by the door, barely noticing the TV blasting some old action movie in the living room. Dad was on the couch, half asleep, a beer can resting on his stomach. That was normal. Lately, everything about him had become lazy, sluggish, like he was always on the edge of passing out. But I wasn't focused on him. I had one thing on my mind, checking my bank account. I went straight to my room, dropping onto my bed and pulling out my laptop. My fingers drummed against the keyboard as I logged in, my excitement bubbling up. 4 years of saving, every birthday check, every shift at Pete's, every odd job I'd taken, all stored safely in my account, untouched. It was my ticket out. Away from this small town, away from Dad's bullshit, away from everything that felt like a dead end. The page loaded. My eyes scanned the screen. Balance, $0. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I refreshed. Checked the date. Looked for some kind of transfer or pending deposit I'd forgotten about. Nothing. Everything was gone. My stomach flipped, my breath getting stuck somewhere in my chest. I clicked into the transaction history. My eyes darted over the withdrawals, big amounts, taken out in chunks over the last couple of months. But one stood out. A single transfer. The entire balance. Sent to my dad's checking account. For a second, I just sat there, staring at the screen, my heart pounding so hard it felt like my ribs were shaking. I read the name next to the transfer, Rick Parker. My father. I shot up from my bed so fast my chair toppled over. Dad. My voice cracked as I stormed into the living room. He barely stirred, his eyes fluttering open like I'd yanked him out of some half-conscious daze. Huh? He mumbled, shifting slightly, like the world was moving too fast for him to keep up. I was standing in front of him now, fists clenched, my whole body rigid with something more than anger. More than rage. It was this deep, sinking feeling, like the floor beneath me had caved in. Where's my money? I spat, my voice shaking. Dad blinked, his eyes glassy. What money? I wanted to punch something. He knew exactly what I was talking about. My college fund. The one Mom left me. The one I've been saving up for 4 years. It's gone. Something flickered across his face, something uneasy. He sat up, rubbing his face like he could somehow wipe away the guilt creeping into his expression. Listen, kid, I had to. No, I cut him off. You stole from me. His jaw tightened, and for the first time, he actually looked at me. I didn't steal. I borrowed it. I let out a bitter, humorless laugh. You don't borrow 30 grand without telling someone. That's called stealing, Dad. His face twisted like I was the one overreacting. I was in trouble, Austin. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What kind of trouble costs my entire future? Silence. That was the moment I knew. Even before he said it. Before the words left his mouth. I owed some guys, he muttered, running a hand through his unkempt hair. Gambling debts. The room spun. I felt like I was going to throw up. Are you serious? My voice came out hoarse, barely above a whisper. Dad shifted, rubbing his temples like this conversation was just a bad headache. I had no choice, all right? These guys, they're not the kind you say no to. I felt something inside me crack. And what about me? I said, my voice rising again. What about my future? Did you even think about that? Dad exhaled sharply, shaking his head. I was going to pay it back, kid. I had a plan. I let out a hollow laugh. A plan? You mean gambling more? That's your big idea. He opened his mouth, then closed it, like he had nothing left to say. Because what could he say? There was no excuse. No apology that would fix this. I had spent years believing he could get better. Hoping he'd wake up one day and be my dad again. But this? This was different. I took a step back, swallowing the lump in my throat. My whole body felt like it was shaking. I'm done, I said, my voice quieter now. I meant it. Dad looked up, confused. Done with what? I shook my head. With you. His eyes widened slightly. Austin, come on. I turned and walked away. He didn't follow. Back in my room, I grabbed my backpack and started throwing stuff in. Clothes, my laptop, my charger. I didn't even think, didn't stop to process it. I just knew I couldn't be here anymore. I should have been devastated. But all I felt was this numb, cold certainty. My dad stole my future. And I was going to make sure he lost more than just money. I walked out that night and didn't look back. Not even when I heard Dad calling after me. Not even when I passed the flickering streetlights that always made our neighborhood feel stuck in time. I didn't know where I was going, I just knew I couldn't stay. The cold bit through my jacket as I walked, my backpack digging into my shoulders. The streets were mostly empty, just the occasional car passing by. I wasn't crying. I thought I would be, but I wasn't. Maybe because it didn't feel real yet. Everything I'd worked for, gone. I pulled out my phone, my fingers stiff from the cold. There was only one person I could call. The line rang 3 times before I heard a tired voice on the other end. Austin. I swallowed. Hey, Aunt Denise. Can I come over? A pause. Then, softer this time, of course, honey. I'll be up. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. At least someone still had my back. Aunt Denise lived about 20 minutes away, in a house that always smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry. She was my mom's older sister, and if I had to guess, she never liked my dad much even before he turned into a full-time screw-up. But she never said it outright. She just hugged me when I showed up at her doorstep, eyes full of concern, and didn't ask questions until I was ready. She made me tea. Tea. I almost laughed. It felt like something out of a movie, like she expected a warm cup to fix the fact that my life had just been flushed down the drain. So, she said finally, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. Tell me what happened. And I did. I told her everything. She listened, her face unreadable, hands wrapped around her mug. When I was done, she sighed. Austin. I'm so sorry. I swallowed, staring at the table. Yeah, me too. She didn't try to defend him. Didn't try to tell me he was going through something, or that I should try to forgive him. Maybe that's why I could breathe for the first time since checking my bank account. After a moment, she reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You can stay here as long as you need. Something in my chest loosened. Thanks, Aunt Denise. She nodded, but her expression was thoughtful now. What are you going to do? I exhaled slowly. I don't know. And that was the truth. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't go to school. Didn't check my messages. I just existed, floating between exhaustion and anger. Then, 3 days after I left, I saw Dad's name pop up on my phone screen. I almost didn't answer. But then I thought about everything he'd taken from me. I hit accept. What? Kid, he started. You coming home? I clenched my jaw. Are you calling to apologize? A beat of silence. Austin, No? Then we're done talking. I went to hang up. Wait, just listen. I know you're mad, alright? But I did what I had to do. I actually laughed. You had to steal from your own son? I saved our damn lives, he snapped. I gritted my teeth. Don't act like you did this for me. You did it for yourself. Just like everything else. More silence. This time, heavier. Then quietly, I'll pay you back. I closed my eyes. He was still lying. With what, Dad? You're broke. You don't even have a job. I've got a plan, he said quickly. Something cold curled in my stomach. I already knew. I knew what that meant. What did you do? I asked, voice flat. He hesitated. Nothing. Just, I've got something lined up. I clenched my fist. More gambling. He didn't answer. Which was an answer. And suddenly, something inside me snapped. I had spent so long hoping he'd change. Believing he would. But he wouldn't. Not for me. Not for anyone. And if he wanted to gamble? Fine. I'd make sure he lost. I waited until Aunt Denise left for work before I did it. Dad wasn't great with technology, so he always left his passwords saved on the home computer. I still remembered them. And sure enough, when I logged into his email, there it was, dozens of betting confirmations, transfers, even loan requests. He wasn't just back in the game. He was in even deeper than before. I should have been horrified. Instead, I felt calm. Calculated. I created an account under his name on a gambling site he hadn't used before. At first, I just made small bets. Losing, but not enough to raise suspicion. Just enough to keep him hooked. Then, I did something riskier. I planted fake tips for an underground poker game, the kind that only serious gamblers got invited to. The kind that could ruin you if you weren't careful. And then I waited. It didn't take long. Dad found them. And just like I knew he would, he took the bait. Aunt Denise noticed something was off. You've been quiet, she said one morning over breakfast. I shrugged. Just thinking. She watched me, her expression unreadable. Austin. I know you're angry. And you have every right to be. But revenge doesn't always go the way you think it will. I forced a small smile. I'm not looking for revenge. And maybe that was true. Maybe this wasn't about revenge. Maybe it was just about making sure he finally faced the consequences. I didn't want an apology anymore. I just wanted him to lose everything, just like I did. The thing about gambling? It's not about luck. It's about knowing when to walk away. And my dad? He never knew when to stop. I spent the next few weeks studying. Not just watching my dad's habits but learning the game myself. I started with poker, reading strategies, watching tournaments online, even practicing on free sites. It wasn't just about understanding how to win. I needed to understand how people lost. And the more I learned, the clearer it became, gamblers like my dad weren't just chasing money. They were chasing the feeling. The high. The hope that the next hand, the next bet, would be the one that turned everything around. I wasn't planning to stop him from gambling. I was going to let him think he was winning, until it was too late. It started small. At first, I placed bets in his name, just enough to make sure he stayed hooked. A few wins here and there, nothing big, just enough to keep him believing that his luck was turning around. And sure enough, I could see it working. I wasn't living at home, but I still passed by sometimes, just to watch. I'd see him sitting at the kitchen table, phone in hand, eyes locked on the screen. His knee bouncing. His breath catching when he saw a win. And when he lost, he doubled down. I'd hear him muttering under his breath, frustration curling his fingers around his beer bottle. But he never stopped. He couldn't. Then came the real test. I needed to push him further. Past the point of no return. I made sure he found tips about an underground poker game, one for serious players only. A game where the buy-in was high, but the winnings were life-changing. It was a lie, of course. There was no sure thing. But Dad? He fell for it. Hook, line, and sinker. I watched as he transferred money into his gambling account. Watched as he scraped together every last cent he had. And then some. Because that's the thing about gamblers. They always think one more bet will fix everything. Aunt Denise must have noticed something was off. You've been different, she said one evening as we sat on the porch. I kept my expression neutral. Just tired. She didn't buy it. Austin, whatever you're planning. I'm not planning anything. She sighed, shaking her head. Your dad might not deserve another chance, but this? It won't bring your money back. It won't change what happened. I looked out at the darkening sky, my jaw tight. I don't care about the money anymore. And that was the truth. This wasn't about money. This was about making sure he finally lost. For once in his life, he was going to feel what it was like to have nothing left to bet on. No more second chances. No more ways out. Just consequences. And they were coming for him fast. The night my dad walked into that poker game, he thought he was finally turning his luck around. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. I waited outside the old bar where the game was being held. It wasn't some fancy casino or high rollers lounge. This was the kind of place where bad bets turned into broken bones. I could hear the muffled chatter inside, the low murmur of men who had spent their lives chasing easy money. The kind of guys who could smell desperation from a mile away. And my dad? He reeked of it. He swaggered in like he belonged there. Fake confidence, shoulders squared, acting like he wasn't one bad hand away from losing everything. I stayed in the shadows, close enough to watch, far enough to stay unseen. Because tonight, I wasn't his son. I was the reason he was about to lose it all. The game started slow. At first, he played careful, folding bad hands, only betting when he was sure. He thought he was being smart. He thought he was in control. But I knew better. Because while he was watching the cards, I was watching them. The men at the table weren't just gamblers. They were predators. They played the long game, letting him win small pots, building his confidence. Setting him up. I saw the exact moment my dad took the bait. He got dealt a strong hand, 2 aces. His fingers twitched, eyes lighting up. He thought this was it. His big break. So when one of the guys across from him raised the bet sky high, my dad didn't hesitate. He shoved everything he had into the pot. His entire bankroll. The dealer laid out the final card. A flush. Not his. The guy across from him grinned, leaned back in his chair, and said, "Tough luck, buddy." My dad just sat there, staring at the table. Like if he looked hard enough, maybe the cards would change. Maybe the hand would magically turn in his favor. But they didn't. And that's when reality finally hit him. He had just lost everything. The room went silent. Then, the man running the game leaned forward, voice low and smooth. "You gonna settle up, Parker?" My dad swallowed hard. "Jay, just give me time. I can get the money." A chuckle. Not the friendly kind. The kind that makes your stomach drop. "That's funny," the guy said. "Because last I checked, you ain't got a dime left." I saw my dad's breathing pick up, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He was cornered. No more money. No more bailouts. And the men around him? They weren't interested in IOUs. I felt nothing watching it happen. No pity. No regret. He did this to himself. They took his car first. Then his watch. Then they asked for more. Something to make up for all the times he had borrowed, all the times he had just needed one more shot. And when he had nothing left to give, they made it clear. He had one night to figure it out. Or he'd pay another way. I stepped back into the alley as my dad stumbled out, his face pale. He looked sick. For the first time in my life, I saw real fear in his eyes. And you know what? It still wasn't enough. Because fear fades. And I needed him to feel something that wouldn't. I needed him to feel what I felt. What it's like to have everything ripped away from you. What it's like to realize no one is coming to save you. Not this time. Not ever again. By the time my dad made it home that night, he wasn't the same man who walked into that poker game. His shoulders were hunched, his steps unsteady. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of what had just happened was pressing down on him from all sides. The house was dark when he pushed through the front door. His hands were shaking. He had nothing left. No money. No car. No way out. And the men he owed? They weren't going to wait. I sat at the kitchen table, waiting. Calm. Silent. Watching. He didn't even notice me at first. He just kept mumbling under his breath, running his fingers through his hair. His voice was ragged, like he had been trying to talk his way out of this the whole way home. Then he finally saw me. And for the first time in my life, my dad looked at me like I was the one holding all the power. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Austin. I need help." Help. The same man who drained my college fund without a second thought. The same man who left me with nothing. Now, he was looking at me with desperate eyes, begging. You don't understand, he said, stepping closer. These guys, they're not like the banks, they're not like some credit card company. They don't wait, Austin. If I don't get them their money. His voice broke off. He couldn't even finish the sentence. I didn't say anything. I just stared at him. Let him feel it. The silence. The weight of it. The realization that there was nothing left for him to take. His breathing picked up. Please, son. We can fix this. We can come up with something. You've always been smart, always good with money. I let out a slow breath and shook my head. You were supposed to be the parent. The words landed hard. He flinched. You stole from me, I said, voice steady. Not just money. Everything. My future. My trust. Every chance I had to make it out of here. He opened his mouth, but I didn't let him speak. And the worst part? I leaned forward. You didn't even feel bad about it. He looked like he wanted to argue. Like he wanted to defend himself. But he couldn't. Because we both knew the truth. He dropped into the chair across from me, burying his face in his hands. What am I gonna do? I tilted my head, considering him. You'll figure it out. His head snapped up, eyes wide. Austin. I mean, you always do, right? I leaned back, my voice casual. You always find someone to bail you out. I watched as the color drained from his face. Because this time, there was no one left. I pushed back my chair, standing. You should probably start packing. It won't be your house much longer. His mouth opened, then shut again. He knew I was right. Without another word, I grabbed my bag, the one I had packed at Aunt Denise's. Because I wasn't staying here. Not another second. I walked toward the door, but before I stepped out, I turned back one last time. You stole my future, Dad. I met his eyes, my voice calm. Now you don't have one either. Then I walked away. And I didn't look back. Aunt Denise helped me get a job. It wasn't what I had planned, but it was mine. Every dollar I earned, every step I took forward, it belonged to me. I started looking at community college options. My dreams weren't dead. They were just different now. As for my dad, the house got repossessed within the month. His debts caught up to him, and the men he owed weren't the forgiving type. Last I heard, he skipped town. I didn't care where he went. Because for the first time in my life, I was free. And that was worth more than any college fund.